LGB. 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 LGB.
They say LGB everywhere I go. LGB. What it means, I don't know. LGB. Whatever it is. LGB. Kamala, help me, please. Please.
Alrighty then.
Thank you. LGB.
That's let's go, Brandon, right?
LGB.
This means let's go, Brandon.
Go. LGB.
Sounds like let's go, Brandon, I guess.
LGB. All right. Let's go, Brandon.
I am Cornholio.
Chant LGB. Right wing and left wing. LGB. Go, you know the thing. LGB. If you don't sing that back. LGB. And you ain't black. LGB.
Let's go, Brandon.
LGB.
Let's go, Brandon.
LGB.
Let's go, Brandon.
FJB. Let's go, Brandon.
I'm Joe Biden, and I
Forgot
this message.
Greetings, my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Reading Epic Threads. I'm your host, Patrick Gunnels, joining you from Houston, Texas, this July 5th, 2024 at 9:08 a.m. Central Daylight Time. One of the only ways that I'm going to be able to start doing my show more often, and as you've noticed, I skipped a couple of days there, is I'm just going to have to do it when I have a good solid block of time, and sometimes that means it's not going to be live. And for that, I apologize. I'm really excited about BitChute, guys. They have done up their website differently. It looks way nicer now. And the playing time was also really good. And BitChute is amazing in that there truly, genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, is no censorship on BitChute. I don't know if that will continue. Bandwidth is incredibly expensive. Sometimes you have to make corrupt deals in order to be able to keep your site running. It's a difficult world. It's a difficult war. But BitChute.com is getting its live streaming game up and running. And God willing, it'll be good. And if it is good, this is a new era, if that is true. So, fun fact right there, BitChute, BitChute is up and running. Guys, don't forget that rainfall is finally here. Now, rainfall is a very big deal because it represents an enormous amount of research on my part. This is a fully Patrick Gunnels researched and developed product, and it is the best lotion the world has ever known. You put it on your skin, and the healing power of the aloe plant goes right to work. I have watched this stuff heal a sunburn right in front of my eyes. It contains nothing but pure aloe, food-grade plant oils, every single one of them, virgin organic, and it's amazing, guys. Go to tulipblooms.shop, use promo code Shapiro to pry $1 from my grasping hands, and of course, if you get 3 or more bottles, you get free shipping. Tulipblooms.shop, rainfall, guys. I would tell you to go to rainfall.life, but that domain name is kind of only sometimes resolving, which is really weird. Rainfall.life. Isn't that an amazing domain name? So once I get that going, it's really going to help drive people to the site. Anyway, today's episode is one piece brought to you from the from a very long time member of our community. And the author is G. Edward Griffin, and the piece is called The Chasm. So today I'll be reading pages 1 through 21 of The Chasm. But first, this clip is a great intro.
A constitutional republic, not a democracy. The ideal of a democracy is universal equality. The ideal of a constitutional republic is individual liberty. A democracy always degenerates into dictatorship, which promises government-guaranteed equality and security, but it delivers nothing but poverty and serfdom for the people it robs and rules. America was founded as a constitutional republic to safeguard the liberties of the people against the tyranny of democracy or of one-man dictatorship. In this century, great strides have been made toward the goal of subverting our republic into a democracy. The foremost tactic of the subverters is subversion of language. By calling America a democracy until people thoughtlessly accept and use the term, the totalitarians have obscured the real meaning of our principles of government.
The Chasm by G. Edward Griffin. There are many words commonly used today to describe political attitudes. We are told that there are conservatives, liberals, libertarians, progressives, left-wingers, right-wingers, socialists, communists, Maoists, Trotskyites, fascists, Nazis, and if that isn't confusing enough, now we have neoconservatives, neo-Nazis, and neo-everything else. When we are asked what our political orientation is, we are expected to choose from one of these words. If we don't have a strong political opinion, or if we're afraid of making a bad choice, then we play it safe and say we are moderates, adding yet one more word to the list. Social mores and religious beliefs sometimes divide along the left-right political axis. In the United States, the Democrat Party is home for the left, while the Republican Party is home for the right. Those on the left are more likely to embrace lifestyles that those on the right would consider improper or even sinful. Those on the right are more likely to be church-going members of an organized religion, but these are not definitive values because there is a great deal of overlap. Republicans smoke pot. Democrats go to church. Social, religious, or lifestyle values cannot be included in any meaningful definition of these groups. No one can clearly define the ideology that any of these words represent. They are used primarily as labels to impart an aura of either goodness or badness, depending on who uses the words and what emotions those words trigger in their minds. Most political debates sound as if they originate at the Tower of Babel. Everyone speaks a different language. The words may sound familiar, but speakers and listeners each have their private definitions. It has been my experience that in those rare cases where the definitions can be agreed upon, most of the disagreements come to an end. To the amazement of those who thought they were bitter ideological opponents, they often find they share the same core beliefs. So, to avoid being blinded by this blizzard of words, our first task is to throw out the garbage. If we are to make sense of the political agendas that dominate our world today, we must not allow our thinking to be contaminated by the emotional load of the old vocabulary. It may surprise you to learn that most of the political debates in our time, at least in the Western world, can be divided into just two viewpoints. All of the rest is fluff, because typically it focuses on whether or not a particular action should be taken based on its predicted outcome. The real issue, however, is not the outcome of the action, but the ethical code that justifies or forbids that action, regardless of the outcome. It is a contest between the ethics of collectivism and individualism. Those words have profound meaning, and they represent an ideological chasm that divides the entire Western world. One thing that is common to both collectivists and individualists is that the majority of them are well-intentioned. They want the best life possible for their families, for their countrymen, and for mankind. They want prosperity and justice for their fellow man. Where they disagree is how to bring those things about. I have studied collectivist literature for over 60 years, and early on it was clear that there are certain recurring themes, what may be considered as the 7 pillars of collectivism. If they are turned upside down, they become the 7 pillars of individualism. In other words, there are 7 concepts of social and political relationships, and within each of them, collectivists and individualists have opposite viewpoints. 1. The origin and nature of human rights. The first of these has to do with the nature of human rights and the origin of state power. Collectivists and individualists both agree that human rights are important, but they differ over how important compared to other values, and they especially differ over the origin of those rights. Rights are not tangible entities that can be seen or measured. They are abstract concepts within the mind. They are whatever is widely agreed upon at any given time and place. Their nature changes with the evolution of civilization, and they vary between cultures. One culture may accept that rights are granted by rulers who derive authority from God. Another culture may claim that rights are granted by God directly to the people. In other cultures, rights are perceived as a claim to the material possessions of others. People living in tribal or military dictatorships don't spend much time even thinking about rights because they have no expectation of ever having them. Primitive cultures don't even have a word for rights. Because of the great diversity in concept of human rights, they cannot be defined to everyone's satisfaction. However, that does not mean they cannot be defined to our satisfaction. We do not have to insist that those in other cultures agree with us, but if we wish to live in a culture to our liking, one in which we have the optimum amount of personal freedom, we must be serious about a preferred definition of human rights. If we have no concept of what rights should be, it is likely we will live under a definition not to our liking. The first thing to understand as we work toward a useful definition of rights is that their source determines their nature. This will be covered in greater detail further along, but the concept needs to be stated here. If a security guard is hired by a gated community to protect the property of its residents, the guards must be limited to activities that the residents themselves are entitled to perform. Guards may patrol the community and, if necessary, physically deter burglaries and aggressive violence because the residents have a right to do those things. But the guards may not compel residents to send their children to bed by 10 p.m. or donate to the Red Cross or save for their retirement or refrain from gambling or use only certain types of cancer treatments. Why not? Because the residents are the source of the authority, and they have no right to compel their neighbors in these matters. The authority cannot exceed its source. Most of the world's laws today violate this fundamental principle. Rights are won on the battlefield. In societies that have been sheltered for many generations from war and revolution, it is easy to forget that rights are secured by military power. They may be handed to the next generation as a gift, but they are always obtained on the battlefield. The Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution is a classic example. The men who drafted that document were able to do so only because they represented 13 states that defeated the military forces of Great Britain. Had they lost the War of Independence, they would have had no opportunity to write a Bill of Rights or anything else except letters of farewell before their executions. Fortunately, Mao Zedong was right when he wrote that political power grows from the barrel of a gun. He could just as well have said the same about rights. A man may declare that he has a right to do such and such derived from law or from a constitution or even from God, but if a thug or a soldier holds a gun to his head, he has no power to exercise his proclaimed right. Rights are always based on power. If we lose our ability or willingness to physically defend our rights, we will never be able to exercise them. Now we come to the chasm between collectivists and individualists. If rights are won on the battlefield, we may assume they belong to the winners, but who are they? Do states win wars or do people? If states win wars and people merely fight them, then states hold the rights and may grant or deny them to the people. On the other hand, if people win wars and states merely serve them in this manner, then the people hold rights and may grant or deny them to states. If our task is to define rights as we think they should be in a free society, we must choose between these two concepts. Individualists choose the concept that rights come from the people and states are the servants. Collectivists choose the concept that rights come from states and people are the servants. Individualists are nervous about that assumption because if the state has the power to grant rights, it also has the power to take them away. And that concept is incompatible with personal liberty. The view of individualism was expressed clearly in the United States Declaration of Independence, which says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Nothing could be clearer than that. The dictionary tells us that inalienable, spelled differently in colonial times, means not to be transferred to another. The assumption is that rights are the innate possession of the people. The purpose of the state is not to grant rights, but to secure them and to protect them. By contrast, all collectivist political systems embrace the opposite view that rights are granted by the state. That includes Nazis, fascists, and communists. It is also a tenet of the United Nations. Article 4 on the UN Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights says, the states parties to the present covenant recognize that in the enjoyment of those rights provided by the state may subject such rights only to such limitations that are determined by law. There you have it. The state can grant rights. It can also take them away. After proclaiming that rights are provided by the state, it then says that those rights may be subject to limitations as are determined by law. In other words, the collectivists at the UN presume to grant us our rights, and when they are ready to take them away, all they have to do is pass a law authorizing it. Compare that with the Bill of Rights in the United States Constitution. It says Congress shall make no law restricting freedom of speech or religion, peaceful assembly, the right to bear arms, and so forth, not except as determined by law, but no law. The Constitution embodies the ethic of individualism. The UN embodies the ethic of collectivism, and what a difference that makes. The origin of state power. Closely related to the origin of human rights is the origin of state power. It is the flip side of the same coin. As stated previously, individualists believe that a just state derives its power from the people. That means the state cannot have any legitimate powers unless they are given to it by its citizens. Another way of putting it is that governments may do only those things that their citizens also have a right to do. If individuals don't have the right to perform a certain act, then they can't grant that power to their elected representatives. They can't delegate what they don't have. It makes no difference how many of them there may be. If none of them have a specified power to delegate, then 1 million of them don't have it either. To use an extreme example, let us assume that a ship has been sunk in a storm and 3 exhausted men are struggling for survival in the sea. Suddenly, they come upon a life buoy ring. The ring is designed only to keep one person afloat, but with careful cooperation between them, it can keep 2 of them afloat. However, when the 3rd man grasps the ring, it becomes useless, and all 3 once again are at the mercy of the sea. They try taking turns, 1 treading while 2 hold on to the ring, but after a few hours, none of them have the strength to continue. The grim truth gradually becomes clear. Unless one of them is cut loose from the group, all 3 will drown. What, then, should these men do? Many people say that 2 of the men would be justified in overpowering the 3rd and casting him off. The right of self-survival is paramount. Taking the life of another, terrible as such an act would be, is justified if it is necessary to save your own life. That certainly is true for individual action, but what about collective action? Where do 2 men get the right to gang up on 1 man? The collectivist answers that 2 men have a greater right to life because they outnumber the 3rd one. It's a question of mathematics, the greatest good for the greatest number. That makes the group more important than the individual, and it justifies 2 men forcing 1 man away from the ring. There is a certain logic to this argument, but if we further simplify the example, we will see that although the action may be correct, it is justified by the wrong reasoning. Let us assume now that there are only 2 survivors, so we eliminate the concept of the group, and let us also assume that the ring will support only 1 swimmer, not 2. Under these conditions, it would be similar to facing an enemy in battle. You must kill or be killed. Only 1 can survive. We are dealing now with the competing right of self-survival for each individual, and there is no mythical group to confuse the issue. Under this extreme condition, it is clear that each person would have the right to do whatever he can to preserve his own life, even if it leads to the death of another. Some may argue that it would be better to sacrifice one's life for a stranger, but few would argue that not to do so would be wrong. When the conditions are simplified to their barest essentials, we see that the right to deny life to others comes from the individual's right to protect his own life. It does not need the so-called group to ordain it. In the original case of 3 survivors, the justification for denying life to one of them does not come from a majority vote, but from their individual and separate right of self-survival. In other words, either of them acting alone would be justified in this action. They are not empowered by the group. When we hire police to protect our community, we are merely asking them to do what we ourselves have a right to do. Using physical force to protect our lives, liberty, and property is a legitimate function of the state because that power is derived from the people as individuals. It does not arise from the group. Here's one more example, a lot less extreme, but far more typical of what actually goes on every day in legislative bodies. If government officials decide one day that no one should work on Sunday, and even assuming the community generally supports their decision, where would they get the authority to use the police power of the state to enforce such a decree? Individual citizens don't have the right to compel their neighbors not to work, so they can't delegate that right to the state. Where, then, would the state get the authority? The answer is that authority would come from itself. It would be self-generated. It would be similar to the divine right of ancient monarchies, in which it was assumed that governments represent the power and the will of God. In more modern times, most governments don't even pretend to have God as their authority. They just rely on SWAT teams and armies, and those who object are eliminated. When states claim to derive their authority from any source other than the people, it always leads to the destruction of liberty. Preventing men from working on Sunday would not seem to be a great threat to freedom, but once the principle is established, it opens the door for more edicts and more until freedom is gone. If we accept that the state or any other group has the right to do things that individuals alone do not have the right to do, then we have unwittingly endorsed the concept that rights are not intrinsic to the individual and that they, in fact, do originate with the group. Once we accept that, we are on the road to tyranny. Collectivists are not concerned over such picky issues. They believe that states have powers that are greater than those of their citizens, and the source of those powers, they say, is not the individuals within society, but society itself, the groups to which individuals belong. 2. Group supremacy. Collectivism is based on the belief that the group is more important than the individual. According to this view, the group is an entity of its own, and it has rights of its own. Furthermore, those rights are more important than individual rights. Therefore, the individual must be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. Who can object to the loss of liberty or property or even life if it is for the greater good of society? The ultimate group, of course, is the state. Therefore, the state is more important than individual citizens, and it is acceptable to sacrifice them, if necessary, for the benefit of the state. This concept is at the heart of all modern totalitarian systems built on the model of collectivism. Individualists, on the other hand, say, wait a minute, group. What is a group? That's just a word. You can't touch a group. You can't see a group. All you can touch and see are individuals. The word group is an abstraction and doesn't exist as a tangible reality. It's like the abstraction called forest. Forest doesn't exist, only trees exist. Forest is the concept of many trees. Likewise, the word group merely describes the abstract concept of many individuals. Abstractions cannot have rights. only individuals are real, and only individuals can have rights. Just because there are many individuals in one group and only a few in another does not give a higher priority to the individuals in the larger group, even if you call it the state. A majority of voters do not have more rights than the minority. Rights are not derived from the power of numbers. They do not come from the group. They are intrinsic with each human being. When collectivists argue that individuals must be sacrificed for the greater good of society, what they really are saying is that some individuals will be sacrificed for the greater good of other individuals. The morality of collectivism is based on numbers. Anything may be done so long as the number of people benefiting supposedly is greater than the number of people being sacrificed. Note the word supposedly. In the real world, those who decide who is to be sacrificed don't count fairly. Dictators always claim they represent the greater good of the greater number, but in reality, they and their support organizations usually comprise less than 1% of the population. The theory is that someone has to speak for the masses and represent their best interest because they are too dumb to do it for themselves. So, collectivist leaders, wise and virtuous as they are, make the decisions for them. In this way, it is possible to justify any injustice, crime, or atrocity as necessary for the greater good of society. In the 1960s, an FDA agent who had testified in court against a Kansas City businessman admitted under cross-examination that he had lied under oath 28 times. When asked if he regretted what he had done, he replied, "No, I don't have any regrets. I wouldn't hesitate to tell a lie if it would help the American consumer." Ah, yes, the greater good for the greater number. If we accept the premise that individuals may be sacrificed for the group, we have made a huge mistake on two counts. First, individuals are the essence of the group, which means the group is being sacrificed anyway, piece by piece. Secondly, the underlying principle is deadly. Today, the individual being sacrificed may be unknown to you or even someone you dislike. Tomorrow it could be you. It takes but a moment's reflection to realize that the greater good for the greater number is not achieved by sacrificing individuals, but by protecting individuals. In reality, the greater good for the greater number is best served by individualism, not collectivism. Republics versus democracies. We are dealing here with one of the reasons people make a distinction between republics and democracies. In recent years, it is commonly believed that a democracy is the ideal state structure. Supposedly, that is what was created by the American Constitution, and the justification for invading other countries and overthrowing their tyrannical governments is, we are told, to spread democracy throughout the world. But if you read the documents and the speech transcripts of the men who wrote the Constitution, you find that they spoke strongly against democracy. And if you look at the reality of life in those lands where democracy has been delivered, you find little difference between the old and new regimes, except that the new ones are even worse. In colonial America, Samuel Adams, a prominent leader of the movement for independence, expressed the common view of his colleagues when he said, "Democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There was never a democracy that did not commit suicide." This understanding of the dark side of democracy was not unique to the American colonists. European historians and political writers of the period had come to the same conclusion. In England, Lord Acton wrote, "The one pervading evil of democracy is the tyranny of the party that succeeds by force or fraud in carrying elections." In Scotland, a history professor at the University of Edinburgh, Alexander Tyler, wrote, "A democracy is always temporary in nature. It simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. A democracy will continue to exist until the time that voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always vote for the candidates who promise the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that every democracy will finally collapse due to loose fiscal policy, usually followed by a dictatorship." Those who drafted the American Constitution believed that a democracy was one of the worst possible forms of government, and so they created what they called a republic. Unfortunately, that word no longer has the classic meaning it did in 1787. Today, it is used indiscriminately for everything from military dictatorships such as the Republic of Angola to technocratic dictatorships such as the Republic of China. But when the American Republic was created, the word had a precise meaning, and that meaning was understood by everyone. This is why the word democracy does not appear in the Constitution, and when Americans pledge allegiance to the flag, it's to the republic for which it stands, not the democracy. When Colonel Davy Crockett joined the Texas Revolution prior to the famous Battle of the Alamo, he refused to sign the oath of allegiance to the future government of Texas until the wording was changed to the future government of Texas, to the future Republican government of Texas. The reason this is important is that the difference between a democracy and a republic is the difference between collectivism and individualism. In a pure democracy, the majority rules. End of discussion. You might say, what's wrong with that? Well, there could be plenty wrong with that. What about a lynch mob? There's only one person with a dissenting vote, and he is at the end of the rope. That's democracy in action. Wait a minute, you say. The majority should rule. Yes, but not to the extent of denying the rights of the minority. And, of course, you would be correct. As Lord Acton observed, it is bad to be oppressed by a minority, but is worse to be oppressed by a majority. The most certain test by which we judge whether a country is really free is the amount of security enjoyed by minorities. To provide security for minorities is precisely the role of a republic. A republic is a state based on the principle of limited majority rule, so that the minority, even a minority of one, will be protected from the whims and passions of the majority. Republics are characterized by written constitutions that spell out the rules to make that possible. That was the function of the American Bill of Rights, which is nothing more than a list of things the state may not do. It says that Congress, even though Congress represents the majority, shall pass no law denying the minority their rights to free exercise of religion, freedom of speech, peaceful assembly, the right to bear arms, and other unalienable rights. These limitations on majority rule are the essence of a republic, and they are also at the core of the ideology called individualism. And so here is another major difference between these two concepts. Collectivism, on the one hand, supporting any action so long as it can be said to be for the greater good of the greater number, and individualism, on the other hand, defending the rights of the minority against the passions and greed of the majority. Democracy comes too in America. The seed of individualism was firmly planted in American soil, but it was poorly cultivated and soon was crowded out by the weeds of collectivism. When the Founding Fathers passed away, so did the spirit of '76 that was unique to their generation. The new generations, no longer threatened by tyranny from abroad and having no perception of the possibility of tyranny from within, became more interested in material comfort and pleasure than in the ideology of freedom. The French Revolution had captured their imagination, and they were attracted to the slogans of equality, fraternity, and democracy. The right to vote became the center of their political philosophy, and they adopted the belief that so long as the majority approves of a measure, it is good and proper. That nebulous abstraction called society became more important than human beings. The group had become more important than the individual. Barely 3 generations after ratification of the Constitution, a young Frenchman named Alexis de Tocqueville toured the United States to prepare an official report to his government on the American prison system. His real interest, however, was the social and political environment in the New World. He found much to admire in America, but he also observed what he thought were the seeds of its destruction. What he discovered was collectivism, which, even then, was far advanced. What he discovered was collectivism, which, even then, was far advanced. Upon his return to France the following year, he began to work on a 4-volume analysis of the strengths and weaknesses he found. His perceptivity was remarkable, and his book, entitled Democracy in America, has remained as one of the world's classic works in political science. As we read his words, which are so perfectly descriptive of our modern time, it is hard to believe that they were written in 1831. Quote, "The Americans hold that in every state the supreme power ought to emanate from the people, but when once that power is constituted, they can conceive, as it were, no limits to it, and they are ready to admit that it has the right to do whatever it pleases. The idea of rights inherent in certain individuals is rapidly disappearing from the minds of men. The idea of the omnipotence and sole authority of society at large rises to fill its place. The first thing that strikes the observation is an innumerable multitude of men, all equal and alike, incessantly endeavoring to procure the petty and paltry pleasures in which they might glut their lives. Each of them, living apart, is a stranger to the fate of all the rest. His children and his private friends constitute to him the whole of mankind. Above this race of men stands an immense and tutelary power, which takes upon itself alone to secure their gratifications and to watch over their fate. That power is absolute, minute, regular, provident, and mild. It would be like the authority of a parent if, like that authority, its object was to prepare men for manhood, but it seeks, on the contrary, to keep them in perpetual childhood. It is well content that the people should rejoice, provided they think of nothing but rejoicing. After having thus successfully taken each member of the community in its powerful grasp and fashioned him at will, the supreme power then extends its arm over the whole community. It covers the surface of society with a network of small, complicated rules, minute and uniform, through which the most original minds and the most energetic characters cannot penetrate, to rise above the crowd. The will of man is not shattered, but softened, bent, and guided. Men are seldom forced by it to act, but they are constantly restrained from acting. Such a power does not destroy, but it prevents existence. It does not tyrannize, but it compresses, enervates, extinguishes, and stupefies a people till each nation is reduced to nothing better than a flock of timid and industrious animals, of which the government is the shepherd. Our contemporaries are constantly excited by two conflicting passions. They want to be led, and they wish to be allowed to remain free. As they cannot destroy either the one or the other of these contrary propensities, they strive to satisfy them both at once. They devise a sole, tutelary, and all-powerful form of government, but elected by the people. They combine the principle of centralization and that of popular sovereignty. This gives them a respite. They console themselves for being in tutelage by the reflection that they have chosen their own guardians. Every man allows himself to be put in leading strings because he sees that it is not a person or a class of persons, but the people at large who hold the end of his chain. By this system, the people shake off their state of dependence just long enough to select their master and then relapse into it again. End quote. Coercion versus freedom. The third concept that divides collectivism from individualism has to do with responsibilities and freedom of choice. We have spoken about the origin of rights, but there is a similar issue with responsibilities. Rights and responsibilities go together. If we value the right to live our own lives without others telling us what to do, then we must assume the responsibility to be independent, to provide for ourselves without expecting others to take care of us. Rights and responsibilities are different sides of the same coin. If only individuals have rights, then it follows that only individuals have responsibilities. If groups have rights, then groups also have responsibilities, and therein lies one of the greatest ideological challenges of our modern age. Individualists are champions of individual rights. Therefore, they endorse the principle of individual responsibility, not group responsibility. They believe we should provide first for ourselves and our family, and then for others who are in need. That does not mean That we don't believe in helping each other because I am an individualist does not mean I have to move my piano alone. It just means that moving it is my responsibility, not someone else's, and it's up to me to organize the voluntary assistance of others. That is the difference between collective action and collectivism. Collective action is built upon voluntary participation. Collectivism is based upon compulsion. Collectivists declare that individuals are not responsible for charity, raising their own children, providing for aging parents, or even for themselves. These are group obligations of the state. Individualists expect to do it themselves. These are group obligations of the state. Individualists expect to do it themselves. Collectivists want the government to do it for them, to provide employment and health care, a minimum wage, food, education, and a decent place to live. They are enamored by government. They worship government. They have a fixation on government as the ultimate mechanism to solve all problems. Individualists do not share that faith. They see government as the creator of more problems than it solves. They believe that freedom of choice will lead to the best solution of social and economic problems. Millions of ideas and efforts, each subject to trial and error and competition, in which the best solution becomes obvious by comparing its results to all others. That process will produce results that are far superior to what can be achieved by a group of politicians or committees of so-called wise men. By contrast, collectivists do not trust freedom. They are afraid of freedom. They are convinced that freedom may be all right in small matters, such as what color socks you want to wear, but when it comes to the important issues such as the money supply, banking practices, investments, insurance programs, healthcare, education, and so on, freedom will not work. These things, they say, simply must be controlled by the government. Otherwise, there would be chaos. There are two reasons for the popularity of that concept. One is that most of us have been educated in government schools, and that's what we were taught. The other reason is that government is the one group that can legally force everyone to participate. Collectivists say we must force people to do what we think they should do because they are too dumb to do it on their own. We, on the other hand, have been to school. We've read books. We are informed. We are smarter than those people out there. If we leave it to them, they are going to make terrible mistakes. So it is up to us, the enlightened ones. We shall decide on behalf of society, and we shall enforce our decisions by law, so no one has any choice. That we should rule in this fashion is our obligation to mankind. Individualists say, we also think we are right and that the masses seldom do what we think they should do, but we don't believe in forcing anyone to comply with our will, because if we grant that principle, then others representing larger groups than our own could compel us to act as they decree, and that would be the end of our freedom. The affinity between the intellectual egotism and coercion was dramatically demonstrated by Canadian law professor Alan Young, who wrote an editorial in the March 28, 2004 edition of the Toronto Star. His topic was hate crimes, and his solution was a classic example of the collectivist mindset. He wrote, "The defining feature of the hate criminal is stupidity. It is a crime born of intellectual deficiency. Criminal justice actually can do very little to combat stupidity. The hate criminal probably needs rigorous deprogramming. Just as some cancers require invasive surgery, the hate crime needs intrusive measures. The usual out-of-sight, out-of-mind approach to modern punishment just won't work in this case. For crimes of supreme stupidity, we need clockwork orange justice, strapping the hate criminal into a chair for an interminable period and keeping his eyes wide open with metal clamps so he cannot escape from an onslaught of cinematic imagery carefully designed to break his neurotic attachment to self-induced intellectual impairment. In the context of a hate crime, I do have some regrets that we have a constitutional prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment." End quote. One of the quickest ways to spot a collectivist is to see how he reacts to public problems. No matter what bothers him in his daily routine, whether it's littering the highway, smoking in public, dressing indecently, bigotry, sending out junk mail, you name it, His immediate response is there ought to be a law. And, of course, the professionals in government who make a living from coercion are more than happy to cooperate. The consequence is that government just keeps growing. It's a one-way street. Every year there are more laws and less freedom. Each law by itself seems relatively benign, justified by some convenience or the greater good of the greater number, but the process continues forever until government is total and freedom is dead. Bit by bit, the people themselves become the solicitor of their own enslavement. The Robin Hood Syndrome. A good example of this collectivist mindset is the use of government to perform acts of charity. Most people believe that we all have a responsibility to help others in need if we can. But what about those who disagree, those who couldn't care less about the needs of others? Should they be allowed to be selfish while we are so generous? The collectivist sees people like that as justification for the use of coercion because the cause is worthy. He sees himself as a modern Robin Hood, stealing from the rich but giving to the poor. Of course, not all of it gets to the poor. After all, Robin and his men have to eat and drink and be merry. And that doesn't come cheap. It takes a giant bureaucracy to administer a public charity, and the robbing hoods in government have become accustomed to a huge share of the loot, while the peasants, well, they're grateful for whatever they get. They don't care how much is consumed along the way. It was all stolen from someone else anyway. The so-called charity of collectivism is a perversion of the biblical story of the Good Samaritan who stopped along the highway to help a stranger who had been robbed and beaten. He even takes the victim to an inn and pays for his stay until he recovers. Everyone approves of such acts of compassion and charity, but what would we think if the Samaritan had pointed his sword at the next traveler and threatened to kill him if he didn't also help? If that had happened, I doubt the story would have made it into the Bible, because at that point, the Samaritan would have been no different from the original robber, who also might have had a virtuous motive. For all we know, he could have claimed he was merely providing for his family and feeding his children. Most crimes are rationalized in this fashion, but they are crimes nevertheless. When coercion enters, charity leaves. Individualists refuse to play this game. We expect everyone to be charitable, but we also believe that a person should be free not to be charitable if he doesn't want to be, if he prefers to give to a different charity than the one we urge on him, if he prefers to give a smaller amount than what we think he should, or if he prefers not to give at all. We believe that we have no right to force him to our will. We may try to persuade him to do so. We may appeal to his conscience, and especially we may show the way by our own good example. But we reject any attempt to gang up on him, either by physically restraining him while we remove that money from his pockets, or by using the ballot box to pass laws that will take his money through taxation. In either case, the principle is the same. It's called stealing. Collectivists would have you believe that individualism is merely another word for selfishness, because individualists oppose welfare and other forms of coercive redistribution of wealth, but just the opposite is true. Individualists advocate true charity, which is the voluntary giving of their own money, while collectivists advocate the coercive giving of other people's money, which is why it is so popular. One more example. Collectivists will say, I think everyone should wear seatbelts. People can be hurt if they don't wear seatbelts, so let's pass a law and require everyone to wear them. If they don't, we'll put those dummies in jail. The individualists says, I think everyone should wear seatbelts. People can be hurt in accidents if they don't wear them, but I don't believe in forcing anyone to do so. I believe in convincing them with logic and persuading and good example, if I can, but I also believe in freedom of choice. One of the most popular slogans of Marxism is, quote, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. That's the cornerstone of theoretical socialism, and it is a very appealing concept. A person hearing that slogan for the first time might say, what's wrong with that? Isn't that the essence of charity and compassion toward those in need? What could possibly be wrong with giving according to your ability to others according to their need? And the answer is nothing is wrong with it, as far as it goes, but it is an incomplete concept. The unanswered question is, how is this to be accomplished? Shall it be in freedom or through coercion? I mentioned earlier that collectivists and individualists usually agree on objectives but disagree over means. And this is a classic example. The collectivist says take it by force of law. The individualist says give it through free will. The collectivist says not enough people will respond unless they are forced. The individualist says enough people will respond to achieve the task. Besides, the preservation of freedom is also important. The collectivist advocates legalized plunder in the name of a worthy cause, believing that the end justifies the means. The individualist advocates free will and true charity, believing that a worthy objective does not justify committing theft and destroying freedom. There is a story of a Bolshevik revolutionary who was standing on a soapbox speaking to a small crowd in Times Square. After describing the glories of socialism and communism, he said, "Come the revolution, everyone will eat peaches and cream." A little old man at the back of the crowd yelled out, "I don't like peaches and cream." The Bolshevik thought about that for a moment and then replied, "Come the revolution, comrade, you will like peaches and cream." This, then, is the fourth difference between collectivism and individualism, and it is perhaps the most fundamental of them all. Collectivists believe in coercion. Individualists believe in freedom. 4. Private property. Dear reader, please be aware that this section is in progress. Some elements need to be edited, some need elaboration, and several issues need to be added or placed in a different location. Thanks for your patience. It is widely believed that property ownership, particularly ownership of land, was unknown to the native tribes that inhabited the North American continent when the Mayflower landed at Plymouth Rock in 1620. The attitude of the natives was popularized by the saying, "White man thinks he owns land, but land owns white man." The concept is philosophically compelling. How can people be so foolish as to think they could own something that has existed for eons before they were born and will continue to exist for eons after leaving their last footprint on the land they claim to own? However, this apparent absurdity quickly vanishes if we just shorten the time period. What if we are talking about years instead of eons? If we were to argue that people cannot own a piano or a house that existed for years before they were born and likely will continue to exist for years after they die, the proposition would be laughable. There are political and ethical arguments as well. Some say that private ownership of property is illogical, unjust, and a tool for exploitation of the poor. Why should one person or a small group of people have exclusive use of anything they didn't create? Why shouldn't it be used for the benefit of all? It's unjust, they say, because it allows those with wealth to enjoy the fruits of nature and the luxuries of production, while other humans who are not so fortunate live in squalor. It exploits the poor, they say, because it allows owners of business enterprises to unfairly profit from the labor of those who do most of the work. It's a cause of environmental pollution, they say, because corporations dump toxic waste into and air and water and scar the earth with massive holes and man-made canyons. None of this would happen, they say, if resources were owned and managed by the state on behalf of everyone. And I'm going to stop there. That's pages 1 through 21 of G. Edward Griffin's The Chasm. So we'll be doing part 2 as directed by a program direction list that I have been sent by a wonderful member of this community. In the meantime, everybody, do not forget for a single moment that your skin is simply aching for a little thing called rainfall. That's right. Rainfall, my friends. Rainfall is here. After months of absolutely painstaking and expensive product development, we have finally developed Rainfall, the greatest lotion the world has ever known. It uses the healing power of organically farmed aloe mixed with an incredibly meticulously selected group of virgin organic, cold-pressed plant oils that absorbs directly into your skin immediately with the benzoin essential oil's anti-inflammatory properties. It smells amazing. It's just absorbs instantaneously. Go to tulipblooms.shop. That's right at the bottom of your screen. Tulipblooms.shop. Give rainfall.life a try as a website. It's the same site. just the domain name, and it's not quite resolving for everybody, but it's resolving for almost everybody. About 90% of you, it'll resolve immediately. Tulipblooms.shop. Make sure to use promo code Shapiro to pry $1 from my grasping hands. There's always promo code Badlands too. Either one for me doing Reading Epic Threads. But in any event, check out Rainfall. Your skin will thank you. And also get the body butter. It's a good nighttime cream. Rainfall is a good all the time cream. I watched this heal my son's sunburn. I watched it right before my eyes. Amazing stuff. All right, my dear friends, thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for part 2. Don't forget to go to epicminerals.net for your zeolite. Promo code Shapiro. Let us pray. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. I love you all. Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you tomorrow.